Welcome to today's Corporate Venturing Insider series. We are at GCV in Monterey, and I'm super happy to have Jennifer from Swisscom Ventures with me. Jennifer, welcome.
Thank you for having me. Great to be here.
Thank you. So let's start with your journey into corporate venturing. What was it?
Yes, my journey to corporate venturing, yeah, I totally didn't imagine that I would be in corporate venture at this point in my career. So I started off in strategy consulting, actually, with Deloitte in London, now quite a long time ago. And then pretty quickly I moved into the venture scene. So that was back in 2014 now. It was really with a view to, combine a few of my sort of passion topics, impact, and also long-term relationships with my clients, as it were, right, my companies. This is something that I wasn't really getting from consulting, and I found that like long-term equity investment would be the right way to become really the guide for my CEOs. So found my way to kind of impact and financial VC back in 2014, and found my way to corporate venture sort of 5 years after that to join Swisscom. Yeah.
Okay. What it is that you use from your time in consultancy that you use today?
Great question. I mean, my time in consultancy was really about the offline to online transition. So it's digitalization wave in London, really affecting, I mean, our clients at the time were primarily the print media companies. So for example, we worked with Smiths News, the largest print media distribution company in the UK, whose print distribution was declining 6% per annum. And of course that wasn't good for their stock price. So we worked with clients who were really struggling to adjust to the digital wave. And I think that is one of the sort of major insights that I bring to what I do today, which is around these sort of transition waves. So digitalization has obviously been a major investment trend for a long time, sort of offline to online in terms of software and SaaS investing. But then increasingly, the next wave, or at least the one I really wanted to pick up on, was sustainability. Sustainability being the next digital wave. And that like digital kind of permeates through our core business, right, or every business. And so seeing that trend was something I really wanted to work on. And then now I think, you can see it happening again with AI, right? I mean, this is a wave that permeates throughout our business,
across the industries. Across
all industries, across the globe. Every cost line, every revenue line can be adjusted by these things. And so, I think that's one of the key things I take away. And then otherwise, it's just like the strategy skill set, right? And the advisory skill set that obviously I apply all the time.
With entrepreneurs.
With entrepreneurs.
Very nice. So let's talk about Swisscom Ventures, just to set the scene. Yeah. What is Swisscom Ventures? What is Swisscom?
Yeah, sure. So Swisscom, it's the national sort of telecommunications carrier for Switzerland. It's also one of the largest software integrators in Switzerland as well. So overall, the business is about 8 billion, I think, and about 4 billion is a B2B software these days. So it's a very big business. It's a very important flagship national brand as well. It's partly government owned. And one of the things that drew me to Swisscom overall was its kind of commitment to sustainability. So Swisscom is one of those companies that really works on its carbon footprint, and has done actually for the last 20, 30 years.
Yeah, before it was
and I've met the crusaders who've been in Swisscom for 20, 30 years working on that problem. And I work with them every day, which I love. I mean, that commitment to sustainability was something also that drew me, because joining Swisscom Ventures, my role was to lead our sustainability investment theme, to catalyze our sustainability related investments, not just for the core business, by the way, and I'll explain what Swisscom Ventures is in a second, but also, knowing that our value creation aspect is Swisscom and this B2B network, this idea that you can take, a scalable software business with a sustainability impact and then scale it across Swiss businesses got me very excited. So you can see this kind of, let's say, impact motivation coming through like my choices. But yeah, so Swisscom Ventures, what we do and our history, is quite long actually. So Swisscom Ventures started in 2007 with our founder Dominic Megret, and it was never really formally approved within Swisscom.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, it was never really formally approved. So somehow Dominic got his hands on a few million and started to make, the idea was to make disruptive telecommunications related investments actually, here in Silicon Valley or close to here in Silicon Valley, and take them back to Switzerland and scale them through the Swisscom network. And the first standout success was with a company called Quantenna that we backed here in Silicon Valley in 2009, went from 0 to 100 million of revenue in 9 years and IPO'd. And that was really kind of, I guess, the founding basis for Swisscom Ventures.
From a success story.
That was our first success story, yes. And because we were never really formally approved within Swisscom, actually reaching that kind of, let's say, financial independence was very key to our survival. So that was achieved quite early. And what do we do now? I mean, as we've progressed through the VC world, investment thesis has broadened. So we started to do quite a bit in enterprise software investing in the 2010s. And of course, that was with the view of leveraging the Swisscom software business as well. And then milestone moments were 2018 when we raised our first external fund. So one of the unique things about us is that we're a multi-LP vehicle. So in the first fund, we had 19 LPs, primarily Swiss pension funds, but also some corporate pension funds. And that was really because we needed more money to compete on the venture market. And as I mentioned, I mean, Swisscom wasn't giving us that much more money at the time. And then second fund now, so we're investing from a 300 million fund today. Our investment strategy remains sort of, I would describe it as B2B software quite broadly, and then anything in the communications value chain from semiconductors up to satellites.
With a sustainability angle for each?
Yeah, I mean, sustainability clearly cuts across everything, and we look to find that now in all of our companies in some way. But then also we make specific kind of sustainability related investments as well.
Now, clearly very few CVCs do multi-LP funds. I think you're the first good example of it. But you work like a financial VC, and then you add value, strategic value. So let's talk about the financial VC discipline, because that's what we talked about last year.
Yeah.
How do you approach it in a way that people perceive you as a CVC, but actually you're really financially VC minded?
Yeah, this is one of the things that we continue to grapple with, and I don't know if we've exactly got the balance right, but the way that we express it is, yes, the investment strategy is financially driven, and the way that we behave and operate is sufficiently free from typical sort of, let's say, corporate or bureaucratic constraints that we can deliver it on the space and time frame of a typical VC. And that's really just how we present it. The value creation is for afterwards, right? It's as a follow-up. We do our best to drive it, but of course, the tail doesn't wag the dog, right? So we can't control the tanker. We are the kind of, let's say, scanning function a little bit for the tanker, but that the tanker takes time to move. Still. Yeah.
But I'm sure you have a few examples where you did shift the tanker.
Yeah, actually, I mean, we have some really interesting cases. There's one from the sustainability case, which is close to my heart. So one of the first things I worked on was sort of the carbon accounting theme. So back in 2021, when I joined, we were looking at decarbonization platforms that we could scale across our customer base and deploy with our business customers. Now, in the end, we didn't actually end up investing into the theme, but we did get the business sort of collaboration functioning very well. So we have a partnership with a company called Sweep, which are rolling through our sort of B2B enterprise customers today. And that's been a great example of like collaboration between our two groups. In other cases where we have, for example, portfolio companies, Yokoi is a great example. Yokoi is a Swiss scale-up working on expense management solutions, and they've been in our portfolio now for a few years. But recently we've signed sort of a joint go-to-market agreement with Swisscom. We have a joint value proposition for Switzerland and the Swiss B2B customers. And also Swisscom itself is getting close, let's say, to adopting the solution as well. So yeah, we do have success cases.
Very nice. And what I'm hearing is that it's not just access to Swisscom, but potentially Swisscom's customers.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, that's actually more what we offer, to be honest. I mean, Swisscom as a customer, it's there, but of course it's slow, just like any enterprise. What is actually far more nimble is our B2B customer base. So we have developed a commercial team within Swisscom Ventures. We have 3 people whose day job, life is to help our portfolio connect with the Swisscom B2B machine. And it takes various flavors, but at a minimum, the things that we can control are getting our portfolio registered as a kind of supplier to Swisscom. And that means actually that we, Swisscom Ventures, can start selling those companies to Swisscom's customers. So our B2B team can really take it forward.
Like if it was a product from Swisscom.
Exactly. Okay. Exactly. So once they get formally registered, we have, let's say, some control within our own hands, which is very important. And the other thing they do, of course, is really look for that tessellation to the B2B key account managers. So Swisscom has over 100 key account managers across all industries and across all locations in Switzerland. We also have footprint in other countries as well through subsidiaries. And we connect our portfolio to the relevant key account managers depending on the industry of focus. And then beyond introductions, of course, you can deepen partnerships over time where there's mutual value and interest. Mm-hmm. So we can Swisscom can play the role of anything from sort of reseller, which is pretty light touch and limited effort from the Swisscom side, all the way through to co-branded, co-managed delivery. So consultative sales, implementation, integration, troubleshooting can all be handled by Swisscom if there's real value there. And
does your team have KPIs that are granular to the level of integration or engagement inside Swisscom, or is that not even in the KPIs?
It's actually, I guess intangibly it's within the KPIs. It is there, of course. Swisscom is in a way I would describe it a little bit like our cornerstone LP, and obviously we do want to keep our cornerstone LP happy. Yeah. But it's not something that we are targeted on, explicitly. The B2B team have goals and OKRs that they pursue, but it is quite fluid, and in that sense, it really can go where we see sort of maximum value for the portfolio and where we see highest chances of success.
Very nice. And I feel like there is a golden nugget about this 3-people team, commercialization team. Do they come from Swisscom or do they come from external?
They come from Swisscom, I would say. Okay. So 2 of the 3 are Swisscom Ventures employees, and 1 of the 3 is a Swisscom employee doing the kind of bridge. But our head of that team, Tina, she's been with Swisscom for the last, maybe 20 years or so. So she knows the organization inside out. Yeah. And that's very important, as you know, in these big companies to navigate.
And so what is success for this commercialization team?
More case studies where we have more sort of, let's say, deeper partnerships, delivering more value to our companies, I think is the objective. But we already do have quite a few very good cases. So
very nice. And so when is a handover between the investment team and the commercialization team? And here what I'm trying to think about is the commercialization team already involved at the investment decision-making process, or was it at the end?
No, I think this is where, so they're not involved in the investment decision process. We do, I mean, let's say, so they get involved post-investment and they do an onboarding, and there we really begin to find the routes for value. You know, what does the startup want? What can we feasibly deliver? And we begin a relationship. And sometimes that relationship takes 6 months to get to where it needs to go. Sometimes it takes a few years, but we always continue to work, right, collaboratively on that. So that's how it works for us. You know, our investment, let's say, screen, when we invest internationally, takes that into account to a greater degree. So when we're investing in Silicon Valley or Israel, or indeed even in Europe, you know, our value proposition is typically like what we bring as a strategic.
Yep.
So that screen is included, I guess, in our scope. That really is what gets us into the tier one deals. When we're investing in Switzerland, you know, part of our role is to develop the Swiss ecosystem. We take a broader approach. It's not the case that we need any kind of strategic sign-off for any of our investments in Switzerland. But of course, it informs obviously our expertise and our heritage, and you know, what we've been successful in investing in the past, for sure.
Very nice. Now let's talk about Swisscom Ventures today. So you mentioned the size of the fund, your partnership. So you have 3 partners now. How is it working in terms of decision making and structuring?
Yeah, so actually we have 5 partners and now 3 managing partners. How does the decision making work? Well, we have 2 main stage gates in the decision making process. We go through what we call a shortlisting, where we really present the investment thesis and whether or not that investment proposition makes sense to us. That involves the full investment team, and it's really you know, providing feedback to the deal team to see whether or not that investment makes sense. The second stage gate is partner-led decision around the investment memo. So of course we all participate in that discussion, but at the end of the day it's a partner-based decision whether or not that deal goes to IC. And then finally we have the IC decision.
Which is consensus-based, majority-based?
Majority-based.
Okay.
Majority-based, yeah. I mean, we prefer consensus, let's say, but it's not essential to have 100% consensus.
Very nice. And then in VC, speed matters a lot.
Yes.
And especially when you source in Silicon Valley. How have you managed that structure and that process to be very responsive?
Yeah, this is in our DNA. I mean, it's been our edge, I think, from the beginning, I would say, because we've known that in order to get into these great deals, we have to be able to move quickly. So if we need to do something within 2 to 3 weeks, I mean, we have done it, you know.
Yep.
How do we make it happen? I guess it's the understanding of the partnership, like when it makes sense to do that, when it doesn't make sense as well. And really having a very sort of lean, let's say, operation in terms of investment decision making. So there are like a handful of things that we must have in order to be able to make the decision. And those things, if we can get them, like we can make it happen.
Which is part of the genius of Dominique, the founder.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the transition, because some CVCs need to change ahead of CVCs.
Yeah.
And your transition is very special. It's public, so it's announced, which is really a partnership. So can you talk about what are the things that you thought was really well done, maybe in the communication or the process?
Yes, I think, I think one of the best things has been able to announce, I guess, a change whilst equally they're not feeling like too much of a change, maybe internally for us or maybe also externally as well. I'm not sure. So in a way for us, it feels a little bit like, I mean, a non-announcement in the sense that we've always had a very sort of partner-driven decision-making model. So it feels a lot to us like continuity.
Yep.
And although Dominic has really been our figurehead up until now, it's been very clear that our investment operation has been a partner-driven decision-making model, and everyone has contributed their each of those partners have contributed a significant amount to the success, be that in track record or in fundraising. And so, for me, I think it was handled well, and it's internally as well as externally, it feels very natural.
It felt very natural, like a non-news.
Yeah.
Very nice. Now let's talk about investment discipline. How do you decide on the reserve? Because you're a multi-LP fund, so you have pension funds, they want financial returns. So how do you think about the reserve allocation, and how do you think about follow-on investments? And do you have any tips for the audience about how to do follow-on investments well?
Yeah, this is a very interesting area. So I will also reflect a little bit on my previous investment experience with Lightrock as well. So look, I think reserves are very hard to manage and get right, because you're really trying to predict portfolio performance, right, and also portfolio cash need. And I think in this environment in particular, it's been very hard to predict that we would go through these few years of difficult venture funding, and lots of companies needed internal support across the market. So look, the way that we do it is that we reserve at least, exactly the amount that we invest upfront for every company.
$1 to 1.
1 to 1 is what we have done with every.
I should say €1 to €1.
Yeah. That's the minimum, and of course the investment sort of director partner can extend that if they want. So for the earlier stage companies, we sometimes reserve more. If it's a capital intensive business, clearly we would reserve more. But in general, 1 to 1 is the minimum. And then how do we manage actually making the decisions around that? So of course, we have frequent portfolio reviews, which provide us with that sentiment of how well are these companies performing, which ones do we want to continue to support. I think the main discipline though comes with these follow-on decisions, which we decide on every follow-on as if it's a new investment. So does the return profile of this investment make sense?
That's a golden nugget.
Yeah. Given our performance requirements for our LPs, and that is really the main focus for us. So if we believe it can deliver 3x plus, we still will back those companies. And we think we have a very good track record of backing our portfolio.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Let's talk about sourcing. You're investing globally.
Yes.
This is very hard to do. So how do you do it?
Look, I think the bread and butter of the last sort of 15 years has clearly been relationships. So that's partly why we're here at the moment in Silicon Valley. Increasingly, it becomes more data driven. So it's harder and harder to get there fast enough. The market becomes so competitive. And as a result of that, of course, we start to develop, more outbound techniques, more data-driven techniques to really make sure we see the companies fast enough. And it becomes really increasingly challenging, right, to do that, because you see large investments being made at early stages in really high potential founders that don't even have a company set up yet. And so you really do need like a data-driven approach.
Are you starting to use AI for that?
We don't build our own. But we have started to use tools which support us. Yeah.
Any good ones to advise to the audience, or you want to keep it secret?
No recommendations.
No recommendations. Okay. How do you think about portfolio building? Because you're trying to make bets which are as orthogonal as possible.
Yeah.
How do you build a portfolio?
So one of the things I like very much about the Swisscom Ventures approach is that it is very broad. So it's a very diversified portfolio. I think that's been one of our strengths historically. So we diversify by stage. We are diversified by sector. Our investment range is pretty broad, and it's really delivered by sort of partner level, director level expertise. That I think gives us a big advantage. We have, I think one of the things that we've seen, which has been beneficial over the last few years, is really when we think about the kind of venture downturn and this kind of macroeconomic downturn that we've experienced recently, is the resilience of having both a kind of software and deep tech portfolio together. Because for a long time, during obviously the upswing boom period, you really couldn't pin our software companies down, right? They just didn't stop.
Yep.
And then, of course, during the last couple of years, the rates of growth have slowed and the market is tougher. But at the same time, the deep tech companies in the portfolio have been incredibly resilient. The services that they provide or the promise of their technology is kind of, let's say, it's there regardless of what happens in that kind of macro interest rate swing.
Yep.
So we've seen them be very resilient and come through very strongly within the portfolio. So I think having diversification is very important, and then having this blend of cyclical, non-cyclical has been very key.
Yep.
And then I think stage, of course, having a blend of stages is I think an advantage, because you can return some money faster to LPs with later stage bets, and you can also then hold and back your earlier stage ones for longer. So it gives us flexibility.
It's actually one advice I got very early before I started TDK Ventures. I was very clear on investing early stage, and someone said invest a few late stage because you want to get quick success, quick exits, so that you can show something. So
yeah.
I can see the multi-stage being really helpful, both to get some returns as well as making very early stage bets.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So, and which is really helpful. Now, thinking about early stage, late stage, engaging with Swisscom, if it's early stage, this is very hard to engage with Swisscom and the customers of Swisscom. If it's late stage, I'm sure it's a direct match much more easily. How do you handle the timing of this engagements?
Yes, the smaller companies can do, in a way they can do a bit less with Swisscom, right? Or they have less scalability potential across our B2B portfolio. They may be less suitable for our enterprise clients, more for our SME. We would probably have different sort of models for those, whether or not we're just like we're an introducer or a reseller versus that full integration that I mentioned. But yeah, it's a judgment depending on what that portfolio company wants. Yokoi started very small within our portfolio, but it's now very big, and it's gone basically through that full life cycle within a few years of being in our portfolio. So yeah. Now,
one of the support you do is boards. So how do you handle board? Do you think about observer or full board membership? How long do you want to keep the board seats?
Yeah, we have, so with international deals where we're typically following, we're maximum observer, sometimes not even, more kind of, it's important that we have majority or clear investor rights, right? Important investor rights, but it's not critical that we hold these board roles. Where we're investing closer to home, where we're leading rounds, of course, that comes with board director positions. And the way, so it depends basically on our role in the round and what we want to achieve and the value that we can bring. How do we manage that within the team? Most of us or the partners have around sort of, let's say, 5 to 8 board roles. And then, for example, I actually have one with our main portfolio. We sort of, let's say, divide them, but we're not encouraged to take on too many.
If anything, 8 boards sounds like a lot.
It's a lot. And it can get a bit much, right? Because you have to balance kind of portfolio versus new investments. I've actually turned down quite a lot because, at the end of the day, you really want to do the ones where you can spend a lot of time and add a lot of value, rather than dilute your efforts. So,
That's a golden nugget.
Yeah.
I think many people take on board because they think they keep being impactful, but actually you're diluting your impact.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, and then I'm a big believer in staying for as long as you're adding value and you're really contributing to the board. Great. If you're not, let's move on, right? The boards need to stay fresh.
Yep.
They need to move also with new investors coming in. You have to allow space for that. So at the end of the day, it's not a vanity position, right? It's like you're there to provide service.
Yep.
Once your role is done, that's that.
It's a position of service.
Yeah.
Very nice. How do you think about adding even more value when you're on the board? When you say contribute, I want to have this very open question is, how do you contribute?
So every time I go to a board, I'm thinking, what am I contributing today? Or
before
next
the board.
week, before the board.
Best practice.
Always think about that in advance. I think one of the best ways to add value is obviously, given our role, we meet a lot of people, we meet a lot of companies, we meet a lot of experts. I'm always thinking, like, how have these meetings this week or last week shaped what I think this week? Who am I meeting that is relevant? So, be that competitor radar, these guys are raising, have a look at this, like this is relevant in your space, a bit of M&A as well, these people, other companies are interesting much lower in the, like, let's say not capital stack, but in the value chain, maybe that could be an interesting target. So it's those sorts of things. And then beyond that, of course, it's like external literature. So any question that the CEO has, how much should I pay this person, advisors, board members, etc. They're, trying to bring in the view, for example, from our portfolio,
Yep.
the benchmarking across on remuneration, really just anything I can get my hands on,
Very nice.
that helps with current questions.
Yeah, you have visibility across many, many companies, across a portfolio.
Yeah.
They only know their own company.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And we see internationally as well. So the other thing is having also, for example, a lot of our companies, the Swiss ones, they want to go global. Or
Yep.
So it's sharing those stories of, like, we've seen other companies do this before. These are some of the mistakes they made. These are some of the things they did well. Sharing some of those when relevant, and also sharing direct contact to people addressing the same challenges. So, for example, CFOs working on, stock acquisitions. I love that kind of thing because
you're just connecting people.
Yeah. Like, speak to the expert. This guy did 3 of those last year, and now you would like to do it too. Lovely. Have a chat.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Going beyond that, do you plan some kind of events where your portfolio meets and they can exchange, or is it always one-to-one?
So we have sort of our investor day where a lot of our portfolio are invited and they get to connect there. And then we do occasionally sort of portfolio, let's say, events where they're relevant, or like, people can self-elect, right, whether or not they want to come. So we have, for example, a brown bag happening on the topic of ESG in April, where those companies that are wanting to upskill and address ESG internally can join. It's kind of voluntary. We also have one plan for this year on pricing and business development on software. So these are the sorts of things. It's topical, it's self-elected, and we offer it to the portfolio.
It's like a value add, which is purely optional, but if they want it, they are going to learn a lot.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. And how often do you do that in a 12-month period?
I would say maybe 2 or 3 times.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very nice. And how many of the portfolio companies go and join this type of events?
For the ESG one, for example, I think we've about 15 of our 50 active are definitely going, and then we'll see if we get any more.
Good. I hope you get more.
Yeah, I hope so too.
Now, ESG is one of these topics that was very hot, and now it's starting to be debated. What's your opinion on this, and how can we stay hopeful?
So I think that the debate is primarily, I think it's primarily distraction, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
That's my belief. I think, ESG has been around already for a very long time. It was around before I started investing, in 2014. It's not really, and it's never really gone away, right? So I think we can debate like the best way of doing it, but the fact that we are going to do it and the VC community is going to be doing it more and more, I think is actually not really debatable.
Yeah.
Particularly in Europe. I mean, the European perspective, I think, is laid out before us with SFDR and CSRD, and yeah, we can talk about how, but the what is very clear.
And on the how, any best practice you want to share with the audience who are thinking about corporate venturing or getting into corporate venturing?
Yeah, so this very much applies in the corporate venture context, because of course our large corporate parents have ESG constraints as well, be those imposed by the SEC or by or the European regulation, CSRD, etc. Of course, every company needs to get a better handle on their overall kind of, let's say, ESG outlook, but also important things like climate risks. So if your corporate is not already asking for it, then it probably will be soon. So best to get a handle on how to do that effectively. I think from our side, we begin the journey in terms of trying to make this a more structured approach. So, for example, one of the things that's been most important to Swisscom historically has been avoided emissions, actually, and like the emissions
in the first place.
In the first place.
Yeah.
And so, for those companies where we have avoided emissions impact, we already kind of gather that and report that. But if in the future Swisscom wants reporting on biodiversity impact, it wants reports on diversity as well, like all of its ESG goals. So that has a knock-on impact, of course, in terms of how we approach the data collection.
Yep.
Like many, we're looking at software to help us with that.
Which is an investment opportunity.
It's an investment opportunity, one that I look at, obviously, actively. Yep. So yeah, I'm very happy to talk to anyone about that. That's what I'm working on at the moment in the background alongside.
So any entrepreneurs listening,
yeah,
this is your interest.
Absolutely, yeah.
How about Scope 3? Is that also part of your interest? Because that's one which is very complex for people to comprehend and for measuring and for tracking and for comparing over years.
Yeah.
How do you think about Scope 3?
Yeah, so for Swisscom, Scope 3 and beyond is actually, like with most companies, the biggest part of the footprint. And we look at Scope 3 in terms of our supplier base. We have over 4,000 suppliers. And we work with the largest suppliers already on things like their carbon footprint. But yes, so Scope 3 is important. We start to assess kind of, let's say, both the supply chain risks, but also that supply performance footprint as well. But the way that we look at it kind of goes a bit beyond that as well, because as a telco, as a digital enabler, we see our role as kind of, it's how do we help people decarbonize and go digital, right? And that even moves beyond, say, for example, our direct suppliers or our direct customers. It's kind of more of an ecosystem benefit. And that's one of the things that Swisscom spends quite a lot of time thinking about, like how does it enable smarter work? How does it enable this digital transformation? How does it, and if it does work with software companies, how does it make that lower footprint, right, in order to help everyone else decarbonize as well? So, yes, but it is a thorny issue, right? How do you get data from all of these?
Yeah, data you can trust.
Data you can trust.
Yeah.
So how do you do that well? So one of the things, as I mentioned actually at the beginning, our partnership with Sweep, which is a great carbon accounting platform, bring data transparency at least to what you have today as far as you possibly can. But it does get difficult to go all the way back through these sort of nth degree supply chains, right?
Yeah. Where do you stop?
Where do you stop?
Or should you stop?
Yeah. And so that's another very interesting area. So yeah, we're working on it, I would say. I haven't seen the solution for Scope 3 yet that really delivers, let's say, Scope 3 accurately and scalably.
And across many different industries, many different constraints.
Yeah.
Do you think that if you find that companies that can do it well, this is a VC type returns?
I do think so, yeah. I mean, I think I would say so. I mean, firstly, very broad applicability, right, across every industry almost.
Yep.
So very broad in application, and then would have really nice dynamics around integration to existing kind of software stack within the corporate. So yeah, I could see VC returns arising.
Okay, let's move to another hot topic, which is generative AI.
Yeah.
How are you thinking about it, and where do you see the opportunities moving forward?
Yeah. So yeah, in some ways it's sort of, I mean, the way that we look at this is AI as a major enabler, right? As I mentioned at the beginning. Already today. And it has been already for a long time. And so I don't want to sort of collapse the AI conversation just to generative AI, because I think it's almost a little bit narrow. But the way that we look at this is, how it's actually the same kind of company questions that we've always asked. So is this innovation, like, is it truly defensible, what's been created? And can it generate long-term value? So we see a lot of innovations in the AI space at the moment which we're not convinced are fully defensible, because with a lot of these innovations, they're very publicly available in terms of the academic research, or they're very, very niche and narrow, and they could be maybe replaced by alternatives. So we're really still looking for those companies which maybe embody those kind of AI first principles, but have managed to box that in such a way that that value is protectable and enduring. So that can come from data sometimes. It's like it's a specific kind of data moat or industry moat that they've developed, or it's a very, let's say, specific service that's delivered by AI. I'm not sure what else I can say.
No, it's good. I want to go back to the multi-stage investment.
Yeah.
Many VCs who decide to invest early would say they hone these skills of assessing the entrepreneurs and their grit and their passion. And when you're more late stage, it's more about the management team, the products, the market, and so on. When you're multi-stage, you need all this skill set and that granularity. How tough is it?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, we have people in the team that are more, let's say, more happy on the earlier stage, and people who are happier on the later stage. So again, it comes down to that kind of unique combination of the team.
And teamwork.
And expertise and teamwork, right? But yes, different questions are asked for earlier stage versus late stage, and you have different signals that you pick up on. And I think it comes down to that kind of expertise within the team to say, with this type of company, in this type of industry, these are the signals that matter. So we've made a few early stage bets recently in the fabrication value chain, and we know what signals we're looking at.
That's your investment thesis.
Yeah, we know that when we see those signals from those customers, which ones really matter, and which ones don't. So yeah, that's how we do it, at least.
Good. How about you? How do you assess the entrepreneur? Do you interview them? How do you do it?
That's such an interesting question. I guess, you're always evolving your sense for what you're looking for in entrepreneurs, right? The more you see, the more you learn, the more you address what you look for. But early on, I sort of interview them. I ask specific questions which help me understand what sort of person they are. I like to assess whether or not this person is a growing person. So, how much have they learned on their journey so far? I also assess kind of how, let's say, how they make me feel in particular contexts. So, I also look for people with a bit of edge, right?
Tell me more.
Well, I think I can't remember where I read this exactly, but you're looking for someone that you wouldn't necessarily be totally happy if you stuck on a life raft with them.
Okay.
Right? Is in the sense of someone so driven and so capable that they could, I don't know, throw you off the life path if they wanted or needed, right? Because you need a bit of edge.
Yeah.
You need a bit of edge. So it's not about, sometimes you're obviously always looking for brilliance and intelligence and people who are great with teams. But at the same time, I think there's got to be something in there that's, you know, a little bit, let's say.
That's a golden nugget. I like this one.
Yeah. So, look, I think you're looking for people with a bit of edge and certainly with a lot of hunger, right? There's got to be something that signals that to you. So.
Very nice. And then when you look at that entrepreneur, that founder or co-founders with a management team, what are you watching in terms of interaction with the management team?
One of the key things to look for is the alignment between the management team. So asking the same question to the management team and seeing if you get same responses, I think is one of the easy ways of assessing this. Are they all aligned on direction of travel? I think that's very important.
And I'm looking at the go-to-market now, which is a more later stage, but how do you interview potential customers or potential partners? Do you spend a lot of time on assessing that part, or is it something which is really refined to your signals you really care about?
I'd say, the more I go through my time in investing, the more I think that this is the key thing that matters, right? If ever I feel like, I wish I'd done more of something, it's normally customer interviews.
Okay.
I think getting the right breadth is very important when it comes to meeting with customers. I think it's important not just to interview current customers and past customers and customers that were customers that declined or churned, which is, I think, it's part of the course, but also you get a great sense of perspective from speaking to potential customers who are not customers today, right? Who are just in the same industry. Like, are they aware of this trend even? Getting that kind of breadth of sense just for the whole market, I think is underrated and can really tell you if that trend is a big trend or not. I'll
double click on the customer interviews because I think there's a trap of confirmation bias. You like the startup, you like their product, you do the customer interview, but you're looking for the customer saying, yes, this is going to help my problem.
Yeah.
How do you keep the discipline or the best practice for customer interview?
Yeah, so the way I do it, and this is back from my Deloitte training when we did this for every sort of commercial due diligence exercise we did, everything is in Excel. It's all tabulated. Same question to every customer. Scored at the end. These are the major themes. Recently I was doing this for a company as like in that particular case, blurred. So we had some customer calls. They weren't actually customers of the company, but a potential customer in the industry, and that one wasn't supportive. So it's like being honest with yourself really and getting it out on paper.
Yep.
Data driven. You can't really avoid if you sit down and really look at it and go, was that really an interview which supported my investment thesis or not? Then you can crack through the bias. But I think you have to be quite disciplined about how you do it.
I like the spreadsheet approach because one, you're going to have the same questions for every interviews, and you're going to be able to compare per question, which really means don't go do a customer interview and swing it.
Yeah.
Really prepare well in advance.
Yeah.
Now, sometimes there are questions you don't think about, and you start to think about when you're already midway all the interviews.
Yeah.
How do you handle that?
Well, I still ask those questions. I think that is where a lot of the magic can come out. So you have to be fluid enough to roll with the conversation. At the same time, there's a structure there, and if you can get the majority of those questions answered and reflected across all customers, then I think you're doing a good job. But yeah, I think you have to follow those trains of thought, and that's sometimes where you get really interesting insight.
Now, tactically, 10 interviews, 20 interviews, 100 interviews, what would you say is a golden number?
I'd say, somewhere between 5 and 10 is the minimum, right? We're VC, we're moving quickly. we don't have time to do 20, and not for every process. So.
Actually, there's an opportunity cost to try to get to that perfect information.
Yeah, I think, and for the startups and for their customers, it's often like unachievable. So.
Now, for those who start in corporate venturing, how do you get these customers to agree to an interview with you? I'm sure you have some tips.
I don't know why so many people agree to interviews at the end.
I think they like VCs. They like talking to venture capitalists.
Yeah, exactly. For the startups, the value proposition is pretty clear in the sense that they get the insights at the end, right, from us. So for them, they get an impartial window into customer perspectives. For the customers themselves, I think often they are either true advocates for the product and for the company, or in the other case, really it's, I guess, to be honest, I actually don't know. I mean, maybe it's our brand or something, but they're often open to speak to us. Yeah.
Very candid answer. I also don't know.
Yeah. So. But a nice coffee with someone, and a nice chat, I guess. There are worse ways to spend your day.
What makes the best customer interview?
What makes the best one? I think, so personally, I like to start broad and set the objectives and also really begin with the person's breadth of experience and then dig deeper from there. I also deal with things in a way of sort of beginning of the relationship between the customer and the company, sort of chronologically to where it stands today. I find that that's helpful for the person on the other side. And then I always wrap up with a numerical question, a bit like an NPS.
That's very good. Now, you would be surprised. As such, if there was a definition for investment thesis, I can't find one online that's definitive. So what would be your definition of investment thesis, and how do you build one?
Yeah, great question. I think there's actually some interesting content in this conference about building up investment theses. How do I do it? I think investment thesis is a little bit like, put simply, like, what do you have to believe in order for this to be investable, or for this to be, 10 billion or whatever your goal is. And so it's a little bit like a hypothesis tree. And that's how I think about it. So what needs to be true? And often I try to make it very few things, so 3 to 5 maximum.
That's nice.
And then I go through the rest of the early diligence, thinking whether or not those 3 to 5 things are substantiated or not. Like, is this innovation transformational? To what extent? Can this innovation be monetized? To what extent?
So at TDK Ventures, we define it as what it is we know, what it is we don't know, what it is that we believe, and indeed, like you said, if it proves to be true, then it's a venture type return. But it took us a while to get to that clarity because everyone has a different way of doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have sort of a framework as well, which beliefs of the fund, right? This kind of contextual framework which you're working within.
Now, how do you get, because most people in VC talk about contrarian view, which is about you need to believe in something before others believe it.
Sure.
Otherwise, you're priced in at that moment where everyone believes in it.
Yeah.
How do you build this contrarian view inside the firm which wants to have some kind of consensus?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting point. I think we do want consensus, but we also are happy to sort of have like a lack of consensus in a way, right? So we have thankfully people on the team for whom consensus is not an obligatory thing, right?
It's not like a religion.
Yeah, it's not a religion. We have very independent thinkers on the team, so I'd say in a way it comes naturally to us. But how do we go about it? I mean, we're happy with discontent, right? We're happy. In fact, we encourage people to really speak out when they don't believe in something. It's all part of like how you reflect on your own investments, right? I find that the naysayer in the group is actually the most useful one often. Glass half empty, glass half full. You really need to have that on every investment team, I think, to be good. But yeah, I think ultimately with every investment you explore, you're often learning new things which help you build your next contrarian view about something else, right? So often just going through the process and getting into the detail of every deal helps you then develop interesting and novel theses about the next deal you might be looking at.
Now, a cheeky question. You go back to 2014.
Yeah.
What would you tell Jennifer to become even better investor?
Oh my goodness. Yes. Wow. So we haven't talked much about where I started, but I started at a first-time fund in the impact space. And back then, I mean, I was very driven by this belief that that was the right thing to be doing, right? We needed to move the economy to be a more sustainable, impactful economy. I was mainly motivated by belief in 2014, and actually going through that process, that painful process of realizing, wow, this venture market is very small in 2014. You know, the impact. We actually looked at the investment strategy, and it's sort of about 1% of the deals in 2014. Maybe in those first few years, 1% of the total deal flow was impact.
It was niche.
It was very niche. And so it was hard. But now, impact and sustainability related deals are 20 to 30% of the deal flow, right? So it's very, what would I say to myself?
Yeah, what would you say, knowing this?
Gosh, well, on the one hand, I think it's important to follow, it is important to make bets like that, right? When you're investing and with your career, you have to kind of make bets where things might not always be clear. But I don't know, you get a feel for what can be right. So in a way, I'd say, yes, that's important, but at the same time, I'd say that can be very, very hard and very, very painful, right, at the same time.
Great segue for my last question then.
Yeah.
What it is that are your bets for the next 3 years?
Bets for the next 3 years. Well, one of the areas where I spend quite a lot of time looking at the moment is sustainable computing, or how do we do this in a more energy efficient, high performance but energy efficient way, and also in a way that doesn't store up problems for later in terms of, for example, PFAS. And so that's one area where I spend quite a lot of time. And yeah, sorry.
No, it's good. Actually, the PFAS is not spoken enough, I think.
Yeah.
And we really need to think about this problem both at the source as well as is there any solution that can actually help us.
Indeed.
So I'm really glad you mentioned PFAS as an issue.
Yeah.
And I think computing and sustainability of computing is a major issue because this is a fast growing market with huge resources of electricity and water that's being used, and we have to be very conscious about it.
Yeah,
so.
Indeed. It reaches kind of, let's say, unsustainable levels, and with the current trends, it looks like that will become even more unsustainable going forward. So, yeah.
Great. Jennifer, thank you so much for sharing so much about your journey and what you've learned along the way.
Thank you.
Thank you.